And thank you for joining today. My name is Alexandra Keatiin, and I'm the Senior Director of Research and Policy at the Information and Communications Technology Council. I'm joining you today from beautiful Vancouver, BC, which is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. For those that aren't familiar, ICTC is a national center of expertise for the digital economy, with over 30 years delivering evidence-based research, practical policy advice, and creative capacity building programs, all for the goal of empowering creative talent as well as competitive businesses. And today we're going to be talking about the global race for talent. It's my pleasure to to chair this session and dig into questions such as how are skilled migrants playing a central role in competitiveness and success. Skilled migrants are known for their positive contributions to technological and social innovation and for empowering the entrepreneurial spirit. Some argue that there's a global race for talent and new attraction countries are emerging as poles for talent destination. China and India particularly stand out. So where does Canada fit into this equation? And what about the US or Europe under this new competitive landscape? Do current pressures of global pandemic play a role? And where do migrant entrepreneurs stand in this evolving environment? These are questions that we're going to be digging into today with our panelists who are with us for the next hour and a half. Our panelists will each give a presentation on the work that they're spearheading in this arena, and we'll conclude with an audience Q&A. So for those of you watching at home, I thoroughly encourage you to come up with excellent questions for our speakers today, and please feel free to share them in the chat as they come to you. We'll be addressing questions following the presentations. Lastly, for those of you that simply can't get enough of this conversation, CERC will be hosting a 20-minute virtual coffee session immediately following. So for those that want to stay on the line and engage with CERC researchers on this topic, please stay on the Zoom call. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists who will be discussing some of these key questions with us today. Ian Goldin is a professor of globalization and development at Oxford University. He is also co-author of the book, Exceptional People, How Migration Shaped Our World and Will Define Our Future. Today, Ian will be our first speaker discussing the future of work and migration. Ian will go over the rise of remote work, rapid demographic change, and digital acceleration. Together, Ian will showcase how these and other trends interact to transform and shape future patterns of migration. Bill Boulding is the Dean and J.B. Fuqua Professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. He's also the previous chair of the Board and Graduate Admissions Council. Wearing both hats simultaneously, Bill led coalescence efforts of U.S. business school deans around the issue of skilled immigration reform. Bill will be our second speaker, discussing the global demand for talent and the shifting pendulum between historically talent attracting and talent supplying countries. Bill will discuss the heightening global battle for skills and uncover factors that shape winners and losers in the talent attraction race. Henry Wang is founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization. CCG is a leading Chinese think tank, ranked the top 64th think tank in the world. Henry is also a counselor of the China State Council and vice chairman of the China Association for International Economic Cooperation, a division of the Ministry of Commerce. Henry will be our third speaker today, discussing China's capacity for talent attraction. Historically a talent supplying nation, Henry will describe how China, with its rapidly developing economy and favorable talent attraction policies, is becoming a destination for skilled talent from around the world. Meng-Hsuan Chou is an associate professor of public policy and global affairs at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Over the last few years, she's been researching the global competition for talent, focusing on higher education and the role that universities play in attracting the best and the brightest. Meng-Hsuan will be our final speaker, and she will provide an overview of some key factors that influence talent attraction, including selection and retention. Now, please welcome our first panelist of the day, Ian Goldin.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this very timely panel. As I think we all are appreciating, the pandemic has accelerated many of the trends that were underlying already in the future of work and migration. And while I think it is not the case that it has created new trends, it's compressed into the space of a year or two events that would have taken 10, 20 years to emerge. And that forces on all of us a very detailed consideration of how this acceleration is likely to impact on the future of work and migration. There are many, many areas where we don't have the evidence yet. And of course, speculation without data is dangerous. But what we can see is that in places which have accelerated first and gone furthest with this, trends are emerging which will transform work. My group in Oxford, which focuses on the future of work, believes that artificial intelligence, robotics, and allied areas are likely to be able to replace up to 40 to 60% of jobs that are currently done by people. This is not to say it will happen. It's to say the technological capability exists, that potential exists. Of course, there's a large debate as to what aspects of work and how we define work, the skills, the occupations, the different tasks that individuals undertake in work. But there are whole sectors of work, from manufacturing to services, which no doubt can be replaced. New jobs will arrive, but there's great uncertainty regarding the new jobs. And what's different about this time is that the space of compression in which this is occurring is much more rapid than any time in history. As you know, parts of the world have still not been touched by the Industrial Revolution from the 1850s and onwards. Areas where steam power, where people are still pulling hand plows behind oxen. Yet this will occur more rapidly. So I would hazard a guess that within 20 years, call centers, back offices, those areas that processed paper in the past, or where individuals responded to calls, will have disappeared. Now, over 1 million people in the Philippines are employed in this, over 3 million people in India, and millions more in Latin America, in Africa. But it's not just call centers or back offices of banks, of insurance firms, of professional firms of different types that rely on these large factories of individuals processing data. It's also, of course, that processing capacity in a manufacturing context. And anything that's repetitive and rules-based that doesn't require dexterity or empathy is vulnerable. We believe 47% or so of the jobs in the US, about 40% of the jobs in Europe, and a higher share in China, around 60%, are vulnerable. Now, how this impacts on labor markets depends obviously on the pace of adoption of this, and this is very variable, and on policies regarding internal and external migration. What we've seen in the US, graphically demonstrated in the work of Angus Deaton and Anne Case in their Diseases of Despair work, is how place matters. And although it might be the case, as the World Economic Forum, McKinsey's Global Institute, and others suggest, that net, there's many new jobs being created as old jobs being lost. The process of getting from an old job to a new job is fraught with despair. It's not just where the jobs are and how you get there. It's whether you have the skills and the ability to leave the places you are. And this is the story, of course, of negative equity, of schooling, of childcare, of social welfare, of dependencies, and many other factors that inhibit mobility within countries. These factors of the transformation of work are, of course, being compressed by the pandemic with remote work now for professional services. And that really has been the great transformation that this pandemic has brought. And that begs the question of talent and where talented people have to be and why they will be in the expensive inner cities of San Francisco or London, New York, Paris, or elsewhere, when the same services could be performed at a fraction of the cost from a remote location, a legal service, an architectural service, or another service. And that, of course, poses the question of why do people come together if they don't have to be? Could we have as effective a conference now as we could if we were together in one venue? And can people undertake the same innovation and challenge? The evidence that I've gathered from my new book, Rescue: From Global Crisis to a Better World, which hopefully will come out in May, suggests that the productivity losses are very significant. Of course, there already is stagnation within the advanced economies and emerging markets of productivity, which is growing at half the rate it was in the late parts of the previous century. This productivity slump, I believe, will be exacerbated by remote work. And although some productivity indicators point to improvements, and that is because people are spending less time at home, less time traveling, less time at work and travel, less distraction, I believe these are short-term gains. Because what comes from people being together, particularly at the forefront of whether it's in medicine or technology or in arts or in professional services, is a realization that we learn through observation, through informal contacts, through challenge. In fact, most jobs are apprenticeships. Most professional jobs are apprenticeship. We learn by being with others, whether it's in academia or in law, whether it's in consultancy or in banking or in other sectors. And that apprenticeship is lost. Existing hierarchies are reinforced by remote networks, by Zoom, where only one person can talk at a time, where one loses a lot of the informality that is a learning process. And that will greatly increase hierarchical management, and that is bad for productivity. So what does this all have to do with migration? My own view is that we are likely to see less migration of professional services in the future because of the potential to work remotely. I think the nomadic professional worker will be something of the future, benefiting greatly, nice places to be, whether it's within countries or between countries. I believe that we will continue to see dynamism in cities, but it will mainly be younger people that will be attracted to cities. I believe we'll continue to see cross-border migration in much bigger numbers, but a greater share of this will be refugees, and that's because of the compounding pressures of climate change. And the migration transformation will very much depend on an intersection with the demographics, climate change, and other forces. And that means that in, for example, China, we're likely to see much less pressure for outward migration and some pressure for inward, but much less because of remote work, because the skills that could have been accessed previously through people going to China now can be done increasingly remotely on the professional services. I think we will continue to see a big question regarding the care sector, regarding those sectors which cannot be disintermediated by technology, whether in Japan or whether in the US or the advanced aging countries. And that is going to be a dramatic increase in dependency ratios, a future of work which is more services that require presence, physical presence. One cannot cut hair or look after an elderly person remotely. And it's that transformation which will determine, but this is not often for the highest skilled professional services. So the talent, I believe, the talent war will increasingly be a search for those that can effectively do jobs which we need in the advanced economies. And of course, this question of exceptional people, the dynamism of societies and where that comes from will be a driving factor. It's no accident that 40% of Silicon Valley is migrant and that virtually all the iconic firms, it's been interesting to see, migrants' share of the increase in wealth has soared because they are highly represented in technology. And that is not an accident. That's because they're migrants that they're exceptional. And it begs the question, of course, of where this will go in the future. My own view is that we're likely to see that dynamic continue to play out, but that this battle, this political battle over migration will continue. The transformation of the politics in the US, and I'm sure Bill will talk about this, is a very welcome sign, but we're not seeing that in Europe. And what the pandemic will accelerate is increasing polarization of politics. We saw this after the financial crisis of 2007, 8, 9, an increasing polarization and anti-migrant sentiment building in Europe and the US. And I believe we're going to see that again after the pandemic, where the devastating unemployment and inequality arising out of the pandemic is likely to lead to a lower tolerance of migration. Not something, of course, I welcome at all, but I think it's something that we need to see and be able to contest intellectually as we go forward. I think I've said enough by way of introduction, and I look forward to my fellow panelists' comments and to the discussion which will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian, for your presentation. Some really interesting points you've made on particularly the link between skilled talent, the growing reality of remote work, and what that means for migration. It'll be interesting to hear from you whether you think that companies are ready to embrace this new reality. But we will take these questions at the end, and it's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker today, Bill Boulding.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. Wherever you are in the world, I hope this day finds you well. That's not something we can take for granted in the current environment. So I'm going to talk about this report that was produced entitled Early Warning Signals, Winners and Losers in the Global Race for Talent, and try to explain to you why this work was produced, and focus on the US in particular, as Ian suggested. And so really 4 things about me that brought me into this work. The first one is, at the time, I was the chair of the board of the Graduate Management Admission Council, which is best known for administering the GMAT exam, but also has a mission to make sure that talent never goes undiscovered, and that talent can go to the option that is best for them. And so in my role of chair of that organization, it was becoming clear to me that with the rise of nationalism, we were seeing a reduction in talent flows around educational opportunities in graduate business education. Second thing is, wearing my hat as the dean of the business school at Duke, it was clear that we were observing, and when I say we, the U.S. industry of business schools was observing seriously declining enrollments in an environment where we saw graduate business education enrollments increasing everywhere in the world, with only one exception, that being the U.S. And of course, I had access to these data in my role as chair of GMAC. Third hat relevant here is simply as someone trained, a faculty member in my old life, trained as an economist, with an understanding that that immigration is actually good for any economy if you can attract talent. And so I noticed that we're in an environment where with the rise of nationalism, we're trying to chase people away and again, reduce talent flows. And then finally, wearing a very personal hat, I'm first generation American. Both of my parents were immigrants. And I personally feel like immigration has been very good for me, and probably the fact that my parents chose to come to this country was good for this country. So let me go back to the backdrop then that I was observing, which is this notion of rising nationalism around the world. And within the US in particular, a serious rise in anti-immigrant rhetoric, and the whole notion that was put forth by the Trump administration around putting America first. Now, the consequence of this was a whole series of actions that both reduced the flow of skilled immigration in terms of the available slots under this administration, but also the rhetoric was very important in terms of the sense, would people be welcomed into this country? And so what we saw was 4 consecutive years of double-digit declines in the US business school industry in terms of willingness of people to come to this country. And you began to see articles in the media with titles such as business schools experience Trump dump, while law schools experience Trump bump. And so the interesting thing is that business schools in this country, which are heavily dependent on attracting a global composition, saw an enormous reduction of applications and enrollments from outside the US, whereas law schools, which are largely domestic, saw a big increase under the Trump administration. Now, when you unpack why did we see these double-digit declines over an extended time horizon, there are really two major factors. Number one was simply the opportunity to work. And with the reduction in opportunity, increased difficulty in obtaining work permission post-graduation, this was the number one fear, that the administration would continue to ratchet down the opportunity for people to study in this country and then continue to work post-graduation. So that was number one. But number two highlights the importance of not just policy, but rhetoric in terms of, are you creating a welcoming environment? And here, just to give you some data collected by GMAC, the second biggest factor driving this decline in interest in US business schools was really, would you be welcome in this country? And so some fairly astonishing statistics. If you were coming from China, 58% of people said, I'm not going to apply for a US business school because I'm worried about my personal safety. 44% of applicants from India said, I'm not going to apply for to a US business school because of concerns for my personal safety. 50% from China said, I'm not going to apply because of concerns about the political environment. 54% of applicants from India said, I'm not going to apply to US business school because of concerns about the political environment. And so without a doubt, it's not just what you do in terms of policy, it's how you talk about immigration and the role of immigration in society that makes an enormous difference. And so for me, the idea that we had become shifted from a country which was built on immigration, kind of economic prosperity, was built on immigration, to turn to a country which was unwelcoming, especially since I had personally benefited from this, was really an astonishing thing to realize. So with that as background, a couple of things that were clear in terms of how we would approach this work in producing the evidence around immigration and the evidence around talent flows. Number one, GMAC itself is a global organization, and growing nationalism is not just a US phenomenon, it is a global phenomenon. And so the work that we produce was not about the US. I mean, coming from the US, we had enormous concerns. The biggest issues that we could see were in the US, but this was a global phenomenon. And in representing this organization and its members, it was really about the global competition for talent rather than just focusing on the US. The second thing is, if you looked within the US and you basically went out there and said, wow, this is really a tough time for US business schools because people aren't applying from around the world, the truth is that no one in this country would feel sorry for a Harvard, a Stanford, or a Duke because their applications were declining. And so in producing this report, it could not be about the business school industry. It had to be about economies around the world and the importance of immigration in building healthy, productive economies that increase opportunity for its citizens. So that's the third point, which was really to highlight the economic consequences of skilled immigration. And so, there's a mix of nice factoids. Ian touched on some of this, but if you look at the Fortune 500, 45% of the Fortune 500 founded either by immigrants or children of immigrants. Interestingly enough, if you look at Pfizer and Moderna, those are two companies that would not exist if we kept immigrants out. So those are two companies in that category, and they're of course very important in terms of vaccines today. If you look at Silicon Valley, 60% of the founders of unicorns are immigrants, and so this pattern is continuing. It's not something that's a historical artifact. 80% of those companies, the key executives are immigrants. If you look at our population, 15% consists of immigrants, but 25% of entrepreneurs and inventors are immigrants. If you look at Nobel laureates, a third of Nobel laureates based in the US are actually immigrants. And if you look at the growth and productivity over a 20-year horizon between 1990 and 2010, that immigration accounts for about 30, a range, it's a fairly broad interval here, but a range between 30 and 50% of productivity growth within that time. And so in addition to those factoids, there's all kinds of scholarship that looks at very careful studies of immigration and repeatedly confirms that immigration is job creating, it leads to higher wages, greater productivity, and conversely, restrictive immigration leads to job loss. And so unambiguously, immigration, skilled immigration is good for any economy. So with that focus, then how did we bring in the role of a business school, and why is that important in terms of what we're seeing in terms of talent flows? Well, two things. One is that we provide the early warning signals. If you look at application trends, these are the people who are going to business schools who will be leading businesses in the future. And so they're an early warning signal about what's going to happen in an economy. And the second role that business schools play is there's an enormous amount of expertise that can talk to or speak to the role of skilled immigration. So that was in the basic report. And now I want to mention that there was a parallel track, which was specifically US focused. And so in addition to producing this general report on the role of talent flows and economic development and opportunity, I have to say that the US business schools were beyond alarmed around what we were experiencing. And so there was fear that we were really risking the economic prosperity, the US economic prosperity as we looked into the future. And so what happened was 50 business school deans came together and said, we need immigration reform. In an environment where normally we compete tooth and nail with one another, we said we must speak with one voice because we're seeing this early warning signal that's threatening to the US economy, and we have expertise. And so we signed on to what was a public letter to the Trump administration and congressional leaders. We had almost every top 20 school, but we obviously had well beyond the top 20 schools. We had big schools, small schools, public, private, from every geographical sector of the country. And we took that open letter and then went to Capitol Hill and started speaking to congressional leaders. And so let me just close with the following, which is there is an appetite for immigration reform, skilled immigration reform in particular, in both political parties. But they are in a position, they meaning these political leaders, are in a position where the sound bites around putting America first sound so compelling that they need help in terms of really making clear the role of immigration in economic development, economic opportunity, and the role that that immigration can play in terms of improving society. And so the ironic thing is, this is the unintended law of the social science, unintended consequences, is that when we talked about putting America first, what we know from the report is it really meant Canada, because the big winner in this whole clampdown within the US was Canada and other parts of the world. And so the US gave an enormous gift to every other part of the world. And now the question is, can we do anything to create more opportunity within the US? And here, let me simply close by saying, this is something where the business community is fully aligned around the idea that, that immigration is a good thing in terms of creating opportunity, but there is a high level of suspicion among politicians around a group like the Business Roundtable, where they think they're just looking out for their ability to increase profitability as opposed to increasing opportunity for society and for their constituents. And so the final comment I'd make is that academics play an important role here in terms of providing credible evidence to politicians and a way to talk about immigration issues such that we can drive immigration reform. And of course, we are now on the cusp of an opportunity to explore immigration anew. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill. Well, certainly as a resident of Canada, we thank you for the gift from the US. We're very glad to receive it. Fully agree that immigration is critical to the economy and a key driver of success going forward. Many questions for you in the question period of this meeting, but we will now hand it over to Meng-Hsuan, who will give us her presentation.
Thank you, Lexi, for the introduction. I also want to thank Anna for the invitation to join my esteemed colleagues here today. It's an honor to be here, even though it's quite late here in Singapore. Let me turn on my slides because I actually have a set of slides for us to look at. Okay, here we go. Okay. So what I'm presenting today are the outlines of a research project and initial thoughts that my colleague Lucy Serna, who cannot be with us today, and I intend to carry out. So any comments and suggestions you have will be greatly appreciated. So the starting point of our discussion are the following observations, which the previous two speakers have already highlighted. The importance of talent. So like many in the audience today, we believe that high-level human capital is key for contemporary economies and future ones, where artificial intelligence will become more dominating in many aspects of our working and daily lives. And for major economies facing structural problems, such as labor and skill shortages, and very importantly, aging population, attracting and retaining foreign talents may be a fundamental strategy to sustaining economic competitiveness. So, and I just want to take a moment to pause here to highlight that I understand the pandemic context has really provided us with an opportunity to also reconsider this whole debate about talent migration by introducing the notion of essential work, which is now performed by many. We generally do not include in discussions about high-skill migration. Okay, the second observation that we have is that the economic downturns and rising populism throughout the last 15 years or so have resulted in growing tensions between two sets of policy practices. So the first set is what we call the inward-looking policies. So these are the policies that prioritize nationals in labor market access and skills retraining. So the promotion of the notion of citizens first is a very familiar one. The other set of policies and practices is what we call outward-looking policies. So these are the policies and practices that concern the recruitment of talents who are often non-nationals. And I think we'll hear perhaps from the other speaker later on. For countries where their nationals have left, it will be about bringing back domestic talents. So our observations led us to the following questions. To what extent have economic downturns and growing nationalist movement in the recent decade affected governance in the global competition for talent? Are we seeing policymakers continuing with liberalizing their immigration policies for promising talents, or are we seeing the shift towards more skilling domestic talents? Essentially, what Lucy and I are interested to examine is whether there are any changes in talent migration policies, and if there are changes, what can these changes tell us about contemporary governance and global talent competition? And finally, given the current pandemic situation, we also asked, how has the COVID pandemic affected the governance of foreign talents? To answer these questions, and really for us to begin thinking about how we can address these questions, we need to first discuss the various components that make up a talent strategy. So what is a talent strategy? Although so far the conversation we've been having here have focused on foreign talents. As you can see in the slide here, bringing in foreign talent is only one aspect of talent strategy because it consists of multiple components. But the scope of my talk today will focus on bringing in foreign talents. And the second part is that implementing a talent strategy requires collaboration between different entities, as we have already heard. So here we organize the entities into two very large groups. The first we call organizations. So here are your firms, your universities. They are very important actors because they are responsible for offering excellent compensation packages to attract foreign talents and also to attract back domestic talents. But the second entity, which was our focus, are the states. And they, of course, they're very important because they're responsible for creating and organizing different visa categories. They're responsible for processing applications, hopefully in a very timely manner, and so on. So for the most part, the primary strategy that states have applied can be summed up by the phrase attract, attract, attract. So here we offer a few examples from 2 EU member states. For instance, Germany has declared its interest in attracting foreign talents, particularly for sectors that experience skill shortages. So they do so through national policies such as the 2009 Labor Migration Control Act and the 2020 Skill Immigration Act. And they also do it through the EU Blue Card since 2012. France, another EU member state, has also indicated its interest in attracting foreign talents, more recently through its 2014 talent passport. And here the French Minister for Foreign Trade and Economic Attractiveness tells us that to revive our country, we will need talents from all over the world. Looking at countries in Southeast Asia, we see similar initiatives and declarations. In the case of Singapore, where I am currently based, foreign talents have been a very important source of manpower. The entry of foreign talents is regulated through work pass policies, which are consistently calibrated to adjust to labor market needs and changing international context as the pandemic. So here I have a few quotes for you, but I just wanted to highlight the former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew's quote, which clearly indicate the value of foreign talents to Singapore when he said, if we had relied solely upon the talent of our natural population pyramid, Singapore's performance would not have been half as good. So even with clear ambitions to attract foreign talents, countries over time have also been adjusting their talent migration policies. And here I give some examples. For instance, Australia, a country that has been the classic case of the points-based system, which I'm sure we'll hear about it later on throughout this conference, has been shifting towards selectivity through skilled occupations list that intends to match skilled applicants with employers. And here, France, we also have seen that it has changed its overall approach towards migration from one that is classically characterized as sous-bi to one that is more selective, choisi, since 2006. So there has also been an increased focus on foreign talents, especially through its talent passport, which is a multi-year residence permit of 4 years, introduced to offer labor market access for high-skilled workers, their spouses, and children older than 18 years. Singapore has also recently calibrated its work pass policies. So in 2020, the government increased the minimum salary threshold from 3,900 Singapore dollars to 4,500 for those who are applying for employment passes, which are the work permits for high-skilled migrant workers. So how do we normally explain these policy changes from a migration perspective? The classic approach would tell us that talent migration policies, like perhaps asylum policies, are becoming more restrictive because governments are responding to internal and external pressures. In our perspective, we think this approach points to a very binary understanding of talent migration policies. It is either liberal or restrictive. Given our existing knowledge about talent migration policies, Lucy and I argue that there may be another way to explain these changes. We propose that talent migration policies may be becoming more selective because governments are responding to competition pressures while recognizing that talent retention remains a major policy challenge. Our thinking is largely in line with more recent reported findings about the nature of contemporary migration regimes, which has been argued to be more about selection rather than numbers. So what do we actually know about foreign talent retention? When we started looking at the literature review for this, we realized there hasn't been a lot of work, or we have been looking in the wrong places. Firstly, we know that retention is a big problem. For instance, in Australia, an estimated 46% of all permanent departures are skilled, and many of them leave within 5 years of their arrival. We also know that talent retention is gender, like other flows of migration. We know that the most common case study of foreign talent retention policy is post-study visas, which offer a pathway from studies to the labor market for international students. We also know that high-skill migration policies are only significant for talent retention specific points between studies and employment. So this is your classic post-study visa pathway. So if there are no post-study options, international students will leave. So there will be no retention. Between employers, so if there's flexibility to change employers, foreign talent may stay in the host country rather than leave. And also between work visas and permanent residence. So if high-skill migration policies are generally restrictive and circulation is somewhat uncertain, migrants are likely to wait until they secure permanent residence before circulating again. So I just want to wrap up by sharing some ideas of how we intend to proceed in our research. So for us, examining foreign talent retention policy and practice means that we need to first describe high-skill migration policy change, which are now increasingly blended. So just an example of how we intend to read the changes. If the system moves from a skill shortages model to one that is more points-based, it may be that the government is moving more towards retention. For us, what is important is identifying the different sequences of these changes, because we think sequencing matters in terms of how they convey the intention of the countries in response to various domestic and international competitive pressures. We argue that we also need to differentiate whether the changes are made between pre and post entry rights, because they may signal intention to the type of talents they intend to retain. And we argue that we need to embrace what we are calling a life course view. We don't have a better word to describe this, of high-skill migration policy. Here we identify at least 4 distinct stages, which may overlap, but are generally somewhat distinctive when it comes to migration policies. We think it is important to differentiate between these stages because other non-migration instruments, such as double taxation exemption or double taxation, diploma recognition, and social security portability may be significant in retention efforts. Furthermore, we should also specify how we intend to assess, if we are doing so at all, policy effectiveness and effect. So for instance, if we are looking at effectiveness, it is important to acknowledge that the existence of multiple immigration gaps that other scholars have pointed out. And very importantly, if we are looking at effects, it is also important to differentiate between intended effects versus substitution effects, because the latter points to ways in which high-skilled migrant workers, like other types of migrants, may adapt to changing policies and practices. Another significant aspect that is also less discussed in the literature, but I think will be increasingly important in the pandemic and post-pandemic context, is the politicization of high-skilled migration. There's a need, we argue, to analyze how talent migration policy change and stasis may be the result of politicization. Finally, of course, there is a need to address the roles that organizations play in both recruiting high-skilled migrants and the retention. And so this is my final slide. Our knowledge about the impact of COVID on talent migration flows and retention remains generally patchy, largely because the pandemic remains ongoing around the world. What we do know is that talent migration overall has been put on pause, largely due to travel bans, or only some embassies are opening and are processing the applications. But we are beginning to see that some countries have resumed in welcoming high-skilled migrant workers, or more welcoming back high-skilled migrant workers who are abroad. So thank you very much. I will stop here and I look forward to our discussion and your comments.
Thank you, Meng-Hsuan. Lots of really interesting policy discussions that you bring to the forefront there. I thought it was particularly interesting on your last slide that you mentioned Germany was actually accelerating the entrance of healthcare workers during this period. Not too surprising based on a sort of logic or needs-based approach, but interesting that they were able to do so. Wonderful. And now we're going to head over to our last presenter of the day, Henry, who's going to talk to us about how China is increasingly winning the global race for talent.
So what I would like to present today is also to talk about will China be the next pro of attraction of global talent? That's where the organizer has given me the topic. I think the question for me, it's obvious. It's absolutely China will be the next pro of attracting of global talent as well. So this is really a great timing for doing that. So basically, what I can talk about is really a few areas. I can talk about international talents in and out of China, and also the recent development of China's immigration policy and in terms of attracting international talents, and also the impact of COVID-19 pandemic that changes international talent mobility, and also I have some policy recommendations as well. The international talents in and out of China is really basically there's quite a large of international inbound and outbound. For example, every year China has about 700,000 students going around the world, particularly to the US, Europe, and Japan, and Australia and Canada. And also China also takes quite a bit of international immigrants now. China has established a new green card rules, and also they have set up a new administration. So there's more facilitating now in China for global talent flows. So basically, if we talk about talent in China, and we can talk about three categories. There's a foreign professionals that moves in China, working primarily working for employment, business, entrepreneurship, and multinational expatriates, investors, scholars. Roughly there's about probably 1 million of foreign nationals working in China. And then there's the international student and the young talent as well. Quite a lot coming back from outside the world. And also there's a Chinese returnees. I mean, China has about 700,000 students going out of China. There's about another 500,000, 600,000 coming back. So there's a great, probably China has the largest international sending student circulation in the world. So that really revitalized China's innovation and development as well, entrepreneurship as well. Also, if you talk about Chinese immigrants in the world as well, China has, since China opened up in 1978, for the last 4 decades, I mean, China has already, the people coming out of mainland China is already reached about over 11 million, become the 3rd largest immigration country that in the world now. So it's still quite a lot. I mean, there's a great expansion in the US, in Europe, and Japan, and Australia, Canada. So you can see that has actually happened. And also, a lot of them are transformed from the student. So basically, highly skilled new immigrants from China. So I think those new talents add greatly to the local economy and add greatly to the international innovation forces as well. So I have some numbers that from DELSA, UN, and you can see the breakdown of that. From Chinese distribution to different part of the world. I'm not getting into detail of that. Next, please. And again, this is also by country that we can see you have a large number of goes to US, Japan, Canada, Australia, Korea, Singapore, and those are really big numbers. So that where shows that the stock of Chinese migrants in top 20 countries of its destination, basically a lot of them are developed countries as well. So you can see the flow is really quite dramatic in those countries. And particularly to the US now, that we can see that China has been sending students. I mean, Chinese student accounts about 1/3 of international student in the US. And so that's really quite a lot. So talent to the US is largely a student, and those students actually supported the US in its innovation in Silicon Valleys, in Wall Street, across US. I mean, in many high-tech industries and academic as well in the top range universities. So I think that really China's talent has helped US innovation and R&D in many ways, and that's really one of the brain drain actually from China to help US on that. So that should not be neglected. So for the international immigrants in China, there's as I said, there's about 1 million in China. But there's a lot of them from Hong Kong and from Macau, and where it's close to China, it's part of China. But also we have a lot of from international other countries, developed countries, and also the developing countries as well. So China is now expanding its attraction of talent from around the world. And China actually designed a new permanent resident, it's so-called green card system, which started in 2003, 2004, but only for the last number of years has really accelerated on that. And so they have many policies. They have there's the evolution of China's green card since 2015, and now it's actually widely spread around the country. And also China is really interested also in attracting foreign talent, but also implementing the foreign talent visa as well. There's a different category of talent visa for foreign talents. And also China even opened for foreign students to be intern, to be student working visas and things like that. And then China is trying to learn from other developed countries and in terms of attracting international students. So that is a talent visa actually specially designed as well. So there's a category for that. The Chinese students study abroad as it is being one of the largest phenomena in the world. I think that is really fascinating. As I said, that just in 2019, there's about 700,000 students already went abroad to different countries. It's a big growth annually. I mean, even now with COVID-19, there's still a lot of application from China, students from China to study abroad, and then that really has been quite a phenomenon. Even now, the thousands of students now, because of COVID-19, now is studying online in China probably, and still that has not dampened the interest of Chinese students study abroad. So I think the COVID-19 affected some of the Chinese students interest to study abroad, but maybe also has opened more on the online learning, online study, and also has been also diversified. I mean, with U.S. Tension in relation, as now more students going to other countries other than the U.S. as well. So in general, the percentage of Chinese students from receiving the countries that study in high learning, the Chinese student goes to different U.S., Japan, Australia, and Canada, U.S., United Kingdom, Germany. So basically developed countries attracted the most of the Chinese students studying abroad. And also that the destination for the university graduates also who continue to further studies, for example, the top 10 universities in China that has also been studying abroad has become a mainstream choices for them. There's a quite number of percentage of that. Based on the LinkedIn numbers, we can see that the growth rate of the number of students studying in the United States has slowed down, and of course, particularly due to the policy of the U.S. has implemented. But also, study abroad has become a mainstream choice for the graduates of most prestigious schools in China. I mean, that's really a phenomenon still continue. Again, also we can see that China has become one of the country suffer from a severe brain drain, and because the people going out and the people coming back, there's a gap, and the gap has been still remain. So we can see that Chinese talent has actually contributed a lot to the other countries, because China has invested heavily on their K-12 education, even undergraduate education, and but also quite a lot of them already has been to the country they study, and afterwards they remain, and then so they have continued a lot to the local economy, and that contribution by the Chinese student stayed overseas has been neglected as the studies under studied. I think that's really the factor that should not be neglected. The Chinese student contribution to the world and to the host country economy, that should be recognized. Again, also, if you talk about the top 10 universities in China, that basically there's new trend that we found out is that more than 80% return and found their first job in China. So it shows that China study abroad, return to China talent circulation is getting more popular because of Chinese economy, and the Chinese economy is really doing quite well, and so that can offer a lot of international student return that has a lot of job opportunities, and that is according to the LinkedIn study. That is a study that the CCG has done with LinkedIn that has showed that has increasing quite a lot. And again, also inbound international student in China between 2014 2018 is on the rising side as well. China now attracts almost 500,000 international students in China on any given year. So it's quite a lot. The total number of students in China, even though some of them are short term, but even for this degree student, there's almost 300,000 foreign students in China pursuing degrees, which is also the fastest growing market for international students. So I think that also now the China has offered university international student working visa now, and so I think China would be more and more attracted to international students to study in China. Next. So the recent development in immigration policy to attract talent, there's quite a few categories that immigration administration system. China set up a new immigration international talent policies and local international talent policy as well. Next, please. So China actually, there's an immigration administration system that upgrade to the multi-dimensional systematic administration. China has actually established a national immigration administration, NIA, and also China explorations in the immigration legal system and integrated international immigration policy with Chinese national development plans. So all those are actually quite new, and it shows the new trend for attracting global talent. Next, please. So I think there's a paradigm shift in terms of administration orientation. Now more delivery service. It wasn't really control, but it's more on the service side now. So I think that has really a good sign. And then trying to be more a wide range of service to international talents to help them settle down, language training, and accommodation and orientation. So those are the international practice that China has now adopted to do so. And also the immigration administration system, they have technological innovation, also trying to be more intelligent, more clever, more upgrading in terms of service, modern information technologies. They're using more technology now to serve the talent, and also for applications online and things like that. So that really great to perform a better percentage of the talent in China. So in terms of opening up permanent resident policies, there's the China, you can certainly see there's a lot of changes. Foreigners are getting more attracted, more welcome. There's also a breakthrough in international student for working visa. There's a host of the policy has been issued. So I'm not going into detail on that. Basically, it's more and more open in terms of PR for international immigrants. And also you can see some attractive local centers now, like Chengdu, provincial municipal government, it's local talent plan. You have Jiangsu province in coastal China. You have Wuhan in a big center, have a different talent plan, and even Yiwu. So there's a variety of local talent plans. Next, please. And also, of course, there's a community that construction development, local international talent community. So I think that is also quite good as well. Next, please. Okay, so there's also a talent community. I'm not going into detail. Maybe we can skip some of those local talent community slides. Let's come to the conclusion, maybe. Okay, so basically that's my conclusion that China has a new developed talent policies, and China has really wants to attract more talent, and we have done a lot of works in that area. We publish annual blue books about international talents, and annually in China, and also we publish English books too. I mean, if you have a page on that, next please, and then we will continue to do more research, and we welcome collaboration from other institutions, and we hope that we can contribute again to the body of the study in China for the international migration. Yeah, so those are the publications we have in the last number of years on migration, and we hope to do more studies with our colleagues and friends in other parts of the world. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. We have about just over 15 minutes now to get to some audience questions, and there are many of them in the chat. So maybe we'll start with a bit of a broad one and then go more specific as we flow through these. But the first question that somebody posed, which I think is quite interesting, is in relation to COVID-19. So if we assume that remote working or remote learning is at least to some degree sticking around for the foreseeable future, are place-based immigration policies becoming less relevant? Or, for example, should countries be looking at innovative methods to attract remote workers, like, for example, Bermuda, Georgia, or Estonia have? I'll leave that, I'll throw that open to anybody from the panel that wants to take a first shot at answering that question.
I'm happy to have a go. I think the point is a very good one, and the idea of nomadic workers basically working from remote areas will increasingly gain traction, but it doesn't. It really is about particular groups that are able to do that, and I don't think it addresses the overwhelming majority of migrants. It's for a particular type of professional workers that can work remotely, but most of the growth in the economies is non-tradable, means it has to be done on location, and I think that is, you can't be a chef from abroad or wash dishes from a remote location, and you can't look after an elderly person, etc. So there are whole categories of migrants who I think will have to migrate or be needed by countries. But I think for professional services and high-income people, which raises a whole series of questions regarding income and revenue and taxation. Will people just be in a race to the bottom on taxation and basically be nomads in low tax locations? And this race from it, and it's also, of course, within countries, the current fight between New York and Connecticut, as people are spending and are likely to continue to spend 3 to 4 days a week in their home states, could severely undermine the tax base of a place like New York. And the same is true. It's different in the UK because the taxation system is different. But where you have local based taxes based on income, that's a very big issue. And of course, compounded by the collapse in income for public transport systems and rentals and rates for offices. So I see this part of the spillover of this change in work patterns is going to be a financial crisis for major cities.
Thank you, Ian. Anybody else from the panel want to answer that? Maybe Meng-Hsuan, not to put you on the spot, but you did mention, for example, innovative attraction policies during COVID-19 that you've seen around the world. Is there anything you'd like to elaborate on?
I think this notion of remote work, I very much agree with what Professor Goldin has said, that it is only very specific to a type of professionals who can do this type of work. And a lot of the high skill work that we discussed today, especially in the healthcare sector, is not something you can do remotely. Taking care of someone, performing surgery is not really something you can do remotely. And I just also want to add that although we as academics, we have been doing a lot of work remotely, most often than not, we find the greatest, the flow of juices is when people get together and have informal discussions. And this is where ideas are bounced off each other and, able to debate without interruption in a way that flows very well. So I do think there is going to be a segmentation of even high skill labor, if we think about this, and this might be, this is very hard to tell how it's going to land, because although during the pandemic period, a lot of us are indeed not moving very far. I do think even if we could do work remotely, many of us may choose not to for some part of the time. So
without a doubt, there's going to be a stickiness around remote work based on what we've learned during the pandemic. But just to reinforce what's just been said, as you think about innovation in a knowledge-based economy, and as I talk to CEOs around what are they most worried about post-COVID, it's the sense of concerns about loss of productivity if we cannot reconvene people in this knowledge work where they can be creative and work together to develop these insights. So again, there will be profound changes, but in terms of a lot of the innovation, it's going to require that we still have people working together.
Perhaps I could add, this is Henry from Center for China Globalization. What I think is actually digital talent. After this pandemic, we probably have a new term of digital talent now. I mean, this has actually showed quite a different, trend habits of working remotely. For example, the real estate is coming down in New York and also probably in Silicon Valley, because the company find that talent working at the home on the digital or Zoom basis is even more productive and more effective. So there's also cross-border conferences, the talents on that, and then different technical meetings, and even software working at home. So probably we are seeing a new area of global digital talent. We may even have a digital talent policy in the future, digital talent visas. That give a lot of implication, digital talent visa, digital talent tax. For example, people can work in China for globally for any kind of the country. Indian talent can work in for any other country now through some kind of online community. So that gives a new challenge to the regulators and also the talent visas too. I mean, we don't have to travel to that country, now can work for that country or that multinational on a digital basis. That area certainly is going to expand. Definitely, it's already we're at the birthplace of it now, and but it's certainly going to expand, and people will get in the habit of doing that, and that will raise a new digital talent deficit, probably times to come. So I think we're not going to underestimate what this pandemic has impact all of us around the world, particularly on the talent of its concept itself. The talent mobility now not really means you're flying on a plane. Talent mobility now can mean you're punching your computer keyboard. So that's really ushering probably quite a big shift of a talent concept and talent usage and talent policy complications. So we probably have to study that. And because multinational, I have talked to some of them, found that working at home on the digital platform even more effective, even more profitable now. So that's something we shouldn't be neglected. I think that's probably what's further study into. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And this next question is an interesting one. It's really looking at how do we balance this rhetoric between growing protectionism that we're seeing in many countries, as well as the actual need to attract high-skilled talent and the economic benefits of doing so. Is there a way to do so that isn't necessarily perceived or presented as this zero-sum game, particularly if we're now in this situation with COVID-19, where we do have many people within a country that are displaced from the labor market? How do we kind of present this in a way that isn't one or the other, but both?
So I'll jump in. So a couple of things. One is, with the rise of nationalism around the world, the very notion of globalism has become a dirty word, and so let me cheer on globalism in terms of its role in increasing the health of any one nation. That it does not have to be a zero-sum game, and there are just so many examples, and Henry referred to some of this in with his data, where you have talent mobility that goes to one country and then goes to another country and another country. And as they do so, they're increasing the value that they produce in each of those countries. So we might have a student who comes from China, who returns to China and builds a new business, a new drone business that then has a North American headquarters in Canada, and an organization representing the company in the U.S. And so these opportunities to build up the global ecosystem are really wonderful opportunities to make us all better off. At the same time, the mistake that we've made is not paying close enough attention to this internal, the external role of attracting talent versus the internal policies in terms of making sure that people within your country have the appropriate opportunities. But we're actually using immigration policy to have the most ineffective, inefficient ways of dealing with those internal opportunities around training, development opportunity in a home country. And so there are much more direct ways of helping your local population than trying to address that through immigration policy. Unfortunately, I think the question has been framed as either we protect our citizens or we open things up, and it's not an either or at all.
So I'll go ahead and jump in here. I absolutely agree with this, that oftentimes I think we need to remind ourselves, especially if we adopt a more critical perspective, that the presentation of migration policies in general, and not just high skill migration, is framed in such a way by policy actors who have a much shorter time horizon than the average people, and especially academics. So they are likely going to frame it in a particular way as very much a zero-sum game, either or. But we know any viable practice and policies concerning migration will obviously have to respect domestic developments. You have to focus energy on developing domestic skills, especially if people need to retrain after the pandemic period. But at the same time, you need to present the value added of foreign talents who are coming into the country, making valuable contribution to not just the economy, but other sectors in society. And just to highlight again, the notion that it is a zero sum, if one high skilled migrant goes to one country and there's going to be a brain drain issue and so on. We can just look very simply at academia. The notion of free movement of knowledge is very much at the basis of our everyday work. The idea that we share with each other wherever we are in the world is, it goes against the idea that it is a zero-sum game. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in as well. I think that one of the biggest contribution of 21st century prosperity is global talent flow. Just by example of the explosion of Chinese student circulation around the world. But also that I think this is also the most lacking of a global coordination and global promotion. For example, we have goods move around the world. We have a WTO. We have a capital move around the world. We have IMF. But for the talent floating around the world, there's no international facilitation or governance of some kind to promote or regulate that, so that we have a brain drain, brain gain problem. But so why can't we have a global talent organization or a new WTO World Talent Organization to really talk about exchanges? Where is the shortage? Where is the abundance? How can we support the developing countries? How can we attract talent from south to north, north to south, and things like that? So there is a global lacking of coordination, discussion, and of course we have a metropolis, we have IOM, we have IRO, but they are not really between the governments to talk about the 20%. I mean, if there's a 20%, 80%, there's top 20% professionals. You talk about professors, students, engineers, entrepreneurs, accountants, lawyers. They are floating around the world, but then there's no really organization to study them or to really issue policies or compare the best practice or issue the new guidelines or encouraging more talent flow from China to Africa, for example. So I think that, there's probably time has come with the digital economy, digital talent. We probably need a global talent organization of some kind, even among the NGOs, academics. So alliance of a global talent organization, I think, is absolutely important, and that's something our think tank is really interesting to promote further on.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you to all of the panelists. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time together today. There are many more questions in the chat, so if the speakers today are amenable to this, we can always send the questions directly to you to answer, but want to thank everyone for their time today. For those of you that are joining online, if you do want to stick around, the virtual coffee session will begin in about 5 minutes. So if you're interested in participating, please just stay on this call and we'll resume shortly. Wonderful presentations, lots of interesting insights. Appreciate your time and thank you very much.